Okay, so we're looking at Il Penseroso now. Il Penseroso is the thinker, the contemplative. Oh, come on. I really hate the way it does it. This guy, have you ever seen the Rodin sculpture? I believe it's in the Louvre, but I can't remember now. Where is it? Open image, new tab. There we go. The contemplative, associated with a whole mode of life and all the associations that go with it, for good and for ill. And we've already seen in L'Allegro, we have its companion poem. In both cases, it is apotropaic. It begins with a turn from the turn, apotrope, and it has the exact same form as L'Allegro. And it begins with the call to banish its opponent from its midst, and it literally can't tolerate it. And having done that, then there is a sort of invocation. But first it has to dispel the other. So it begins, hence, as in get away, vain, deluding joys. And this is probably written after the first. I think L'Allegro is first. So hence, vain, deluding joys. So you apparent joys, you're not real joys. The real joys are spiritual, not so worldly as yours are. The brood of folly without father bred. So note that the previous one had a parentage without father bred. How little you bested or fill the mixed brain with all your toys. Dwell in some idle brain and fancies fond with gaudy shapes possess as thick and numberless as the gay motes that people the sunbeams. Now, when you look at the beam of light, you can see little speckles of dust in it, and the motes then are those dust specks. I think that's the association. Bits of dust be visible in very light. So then you'll get discussions about, oh, how about that? Notes that in Morpheus, the god of dreams, is surrounded by fantastic swarms of dreams resembling the unnumbered motes which in the sun do play. So helpful for what follows here. The gay motes, the people of the sunbeams, are like as hovering beams, the fickle pensioners of Morpheus train. And at Cambridge University, an undergraduate student who is not a scholar on the foundation of a college is a pensioner, pension, or a commoner. But hail, thou goddess, sage and holy. So folly is attributed to cheerfulness, and true wisdom then is associated with thoughtfulness, Penseroso. Hail, divinest melancholy, not with its negative associations, but with all of its positive associations then, whose saintly visage is too bright to hit the sense of human sight. The very thing that he appeals to in Book 3 of Paradise Lost, when he says that his eyes have lost their capacity to see even the sun's beams, and prays for an internal sight to compensate for that, superior in nature. Because he's from one vantage, the book of knowledge, he says, is quite cut off from him. He can no longer look at the world and see what's going on, but there's an internal wisdom that comes from that, and insight that comes from it. And then he cites a series of precedents for this. He cites Homer himself, who is reputed to be blind Thamyris. He will cite, who's the figure of blindness? Anyway, he'll go through a whole series, and even the Apostle Paul, when he, on the Damascus Road, loses his sight and yet gains a knowledge of the world and God's presence in a way that he hadn't before. Blindness is seen as a curse that nonetheless is a blessing in disguise. So melancholy, whose saintly visage is not too dark, but rather too bright to hit the sense of human sight. And therefore, to our weaker view, that is the eyes, o'erlaid with black, stayed wisdom's hue. Black, but such as in esteem Prince Memnon's sister might beseem, or that starred Ethiop queen that strove to set her beauty's praise above the sea nymphs, and their powers offended. Yet thou art higher far descended. Thee bright-haired Vesta long of yore to solitary Saturn bore. His daughter she, in Saturn's reign, such mixture was not held a stain. Oft in glimmering bowers and glades he met her, and in secret shades of woody Ida's inmost grove, while yet there was no fear of Jove. Come, pensive nun, devout and pure, sober, steadfast, and demure, all in a robe of darkest grain, flowing with majestic train, and sable stole of cypress lawn over thy decent shoulders drawn. Come, but keep thy wonted state, with even steep and musing gait, and looks commercing with the skies, and thy rapt soul sitting in thine eyes. There, held in holy passion still, forget thyself to marble, till with a sad leaden downward cast, thou fix them on the earth as fast, and join with thee calm peace and quiet, spare fast that oft with gods doth diet, and hears the muses in a ring, I round about Jove's altar sing, and add to these, so the celestial music, that the inaudible music, just like it's an invisible sight, even though it's clothed in black, which betokens mourning, there's no mourning here, there's a different type of joy, a spiritual joy. Likewise, there's a spiritual music in the music of the spheres that he's referring to, that in trim gardens takes his pleasure, but first and chiefest with thee bring him that yon soars on golden wing, guiding with fiery wheeled throne the cherub contemplation. And the mute silence hissed along, lest Philomel will deign a song in her sweetest, saddest plight, smoothing the rugged brow of night. While Cynthia checks her dragon yoke, and this will be taken, Cynthia, he'll be getting from not just Virgil's Aeneid, but specifically with Spenser, and his fairy queen checks her dragon yoke, gently o'er the accustomed oak. Sweet bird that shunst the noise of folly, most musical, most melancholy. Thee, chantress of the woods among, I woo to hear thy even song. And missing thee, I walk unseen on the dry, smooth-shaven green, to behold the wandering moon riding near her highest noon, like one that had been led astray through the heaven's wide pathless way, and oft, as if her head she bowed, stooping through a fleecy cloud. Oft on a plat of rising ground, I oft the far-off curfew sound over some wide-watered shore, swinging low with sullen roar, or if the air will not permit, some still removed place will fit, where glowing embers through the room teach light to counterfeit a gloom. Far from all resort of mirth, save the cricket on the hearth, or the bellman's drowsy charm, to bless the doors from nightly harm. Or let my lamp at midnight hour be seen in some high lonely tower, where I may oft outwatch the bear, with thrice great Hermes, or on sphere the spirit of Plato. So now he gets into a sort of, again, the mystical tradition, the internal, the magical, and the Neoplatonic. And Hermes, the all-seeing. Remember, he's the messenger of the gods. The way that we interpret, he's the interpreter of the gods, hence the word hermeneutics. The insightful mind, or on sphere the spirit of Plato, to unfold what worlds or what vast regions hold the immortal mind that forsook her mansion in this fleshly nook. He's referring here to Plato's Timaeus, the work best known, the only surviving one known of Plato for a very long time in the Western world. Plato's Timaeus, which is about creation and about love. I think here referred to. And of those demons that are found in fire, air, flood, or underground, whose power hath a true consent with planet or with element, sometime let gorgeous tragedy and sceptred Paul come sweeping by, presenting Thebes or Pelops' line, or the tale of Troy divine. Or what, though rare, of later age, ennobled hath the buskined stage. Again, the buskin is the footwear of the tragic actor as opposed to the sock referred to in the other. So now he invokes the tragedy, which, as Aristotle says, is the more serious form and is therefore the highest form, one that most approximates what philosophy teaches. So does tragedy. Philosophy, remember, the famous Socrates was considered by the Delphic oracle to be the wisest man in the world, proclaimed, and on the portico of the Delphic oracle, it said, Gnothi seauton, know thyself. That was the injunction of the Delphic oracle, dedicated to the god Apollo. And Socrates sought to know himself, and what he knew about himself was that he knew nothing. All I know is I know nothing, so he asked the wise of the world, tell me about this or that, and in interaction, in dialogue with the wisest, soon proved them to be fools, which did not gain him friends and admirers, but rather their contempt and so forth. But the tragedy deals with this self-knowledge. Remember, the figure of Oedipus claims to know the mind of the gods. He's the one that saved the city of Thebes to begin with, solved the riddle of the Sphinx. And now the city's destroying his own city, and he is called upon to answer it. But the problem for Oedipus is that he does not know who he is. And Aristotle says this is the quintessential tragedy. It deals with the exact same subject matter as philosophy does. And what does it deal with the problem? The problem of human self-knowing. We don't know who we are. We're just like Oedipus in that sense. We're blind to who we are and what we are for, etc. And the tragedy deals with that same philosophical subject matter, which is why Aristotle, unlike Plato, does not want to banish the poets, but rather to give them their due. Ennobled hath with busk and stage, but sad version, that thy power might raise Musaeus from his bower, or bid the soul of Orpheus sing. Such notes as warbled to the string drew iron tears down Pluto's cheek, and made hell grant what love did seek. Remember again, this tale of Orpheus and Eurydice. Pluto, or hell, takes Eurydice down to the underworld, and Orpheus descends because she's not dead. He goes down to retrieve her, and because of the beauty of his music, Pluto releases Eurydice under the condition, basically, that every spring she should, or every fall she should die again, go back again. It's related to the cycles of nature, etc. Anyway, the story of Combuscan bold, of Campbell, and of Algarsife, who had Canis to wife and owned the virtuous ring and glass, and of the wondrous oars of brass, of which the Tartar king did ride, and if aught else, great bards beside in sage and solemn tunes have sung, of tourneys and of trophies hung, of forests and enchantments drear, where more is meant than meets the ear. Thus night oft see me in the pale career, till civil suited morn appear. Not tricked and frounced as she was wont with the Attic boy to hunt, but kerchiefed in a comely cloud, while rocking clouds are piping loud. or ushered with a shower still, when the gust hath blown his fill, ending on the rustling leaves with minute drops from off the eaves. And when the sun begins to fling his flaring beams, me, goddess, bring to arched walks of twilight groves, and shadows brown that sylvan loves, of pine or monumental oak, where the rude axe with heaved stroke was never heard the nymphs to daunt, or fright them from their hallowed haunt. There in close covert by some brook, where no profaner eye may look, hide me from the day's garish eye, while the bee with honeyed thigh that at her flowery work doth sing, and the waters murmuring with such consort as they keep, entice the dewy feathered sleep, and let some strange mysterious dream wave at his wings an airy stream of lively portrait displayed, soft on my eyelids laid. And as I wake, sweet music breathe above, about, or underneath, sent by some spirit to mortals good, or the unseen genius of the wood. And let my feet never fail to walk the studious cloisters pale. Now I associate with the monastic life, the light of retreat and contemplation. And love the high embowered roof with antic pillars massy proof, and storied windows richly dight. He loves this word dight. We don't use this word anymore. Decorated or decked. Poetic vocabulary now obsolete. Casting a dim religious light, and there let the pealing organ blow to the full-voiced choir below, in service high and anthems clear, and may with sweetness through mine ear dissolve me into ecstasies, and bring all heaven before mine eyes, and may at last my weary age find out the peaceful hermitage, the hairy gown and mossy cell, where I may sit and rightly spell. Not talking about spelling, he's talking about using spells to say the right words. Spell to engage in study or contemplation of something. Well, I think it has the connotation of magic, just like a magic spell does to spell. Hence the gospel. It's the God's magic, the gospel, the word that brings the dead to life is the gospel in English. Of every star that heaven doth show, and every herb that sips the dew, till old experience do attain to something like prophetic strain, these pleasures melancholy give, and I with thee will choose to live. Now, question here, and I've cited the ending here because some think that Il Penseroso is superior to L'Allegro. That's a question to debate. Is it actually invoking something superior? It would, just from our knowledge of Milton, you might think so. You might think so, because of course his life is a life of contemplation, of retreating from certain things in order to focus on other things, and he regards them as superior. It's plain from his own corpus of writing that he regards them as so. Like, as opposed to the light of the world, there's a truer light that shines and irradiates the mind. That is the life of contemplation of the philosophers and the life of God. But does he really mean the one superior to the other? That's a question. What do you think, or do you go ahead?
Yeah, I was thinking that they're in need of each other.
Seems to me.
I don't think one would necessarily manage to survive without the other. In a sense of they're complementary. They might not enjoy each other's company at all times, but I know when I get into deep reflection, having someone of excitement and joy to spend a few hours with keeps me sane.
Yeah. So it's not good for man to be alone. The contemplative spends a lot of time alone. Spending time alone is very good for all manner of things. because you're never alone, you're with God. But human beings need other human beings for a reason. And so you can't say one to the exclusion of the other. But whether he regards contemplation or the life of the thinker superior to the life of the cheerful, I think he probably does, just based on his poetic corpus. The question, and what he says later on in it, like in Paradise Lost, you won't be loath to leave this paradise, but shall have within thee a paradise within, happier far, with the knowledge of your Redeemer ever blessed and his example and what he does and what you gain in him by faith in his works, and just add deeds to your knowledge answerable, says the angel to Adam. There is an emphasis on the internal, as it were, the thoughtful, the contemplative. But it's certainly not to the exclusion of the other. So there's no victory here. As in a decisive, the cheerful is done and is of no significance. But I do think the Penseroso probably inclines more to Milton's view, or what he would recommend as the right position. But he does have in mind remember what we said about his educational track, how practical it was. It involved physical activity, it involved music, it involved, training for war, training in agriculture, all of the practical arts of living a earthly life, provision for that. That's part of his educational tract. It's not just reading Greek and Latin, which we might think it is because he has this extensive reading list of ancient authors, and recommends languages that are what we would call dead languages even. So it seems like with that emphasis that he is wholly pushing us in the contemplative life, but I don't think, if you look at the broader picture of what Milton recommends, I don't think we can conclude that. And I don't think that the two poems, that Il Penseroso, as I say, just vanquishes the cheerful. They do need each other. But the downbeat probably is on Il Penseroso. These pleasures melancholy give, and I with thee will choose to live. These pleasures, but you have to give those pleasures. It's not, I don't choose because I'm a melancholy person, I'm by temperament this. It's because I think there's a superior joy to this joy. That's consistent with Milton's message. And if you look at the Invocation of the Muse in Book 3, where he talks about the loss of sight and the recompense of an inner sight. And then he talks about the inner paradise as the recompense for paradise lost. Then at least there's a consistency here to see Il Penseroso as the one that he inclines towards. But again, like anybody in the Socratic tradition, to be a faithful interlocutor, you have to actually represent the best the other position can give. Like, don't straw man cheerful people as bubbly and stupid. He's not doing that. He's giving them their due. Having said that, again, even if you take it at the type of drama depicted, the comedy is low. It's the commoner's version of thing. It's not seen as seriously by the intellectual tradition. Aristotle mentions comedy, but then he doesn't give, or we've lost what he says about comedy. If you ever watched or have seen or read Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, it's about the lost comedy of Aristotle, or treatise on comedy, which a monk basically tears up and poisons so that it doesn't see the light of day, because it said if anybody ever realized that Aristotle had written on comedy and commends it, we would not be able to, life would be ruined. People would be cheerful. They wouldn't want to be contemplative or monastic, so he kills then people. That's a modern day detective type. Have you read Umberto Eco's Name of the Rose? And then there's a movie that's based on it, which is rather scandalous, that I don't recommend, other than that Sean Connery's in it, which is kind of cool. And an early young boy, who is it, Christian Slater or something like that? Yeah. But it's a little bit graphic, sexually graphic. But the book is terrific, and Umberto Eco is a classical scholar. And he writes about things he knows about, and it gets into discussions of, he's a semiotician at Eco, so he talks about signs and things, and the nominalist versus the realist, and all that sort of. So it's a really interesting novel in that sense. But Milton I think, is on the side of the contemplatives, and will agree with the tradition that tragedy, because it deals with the mystery of human existence, rather than comedy, which just disparages and mocks and makes fun of, is of a greater seriousness and worthier attention. And so if you're going to teach anybody, if you're going to use literature to teach and to delight, and you had to get rid of one of the genres, you would get rid of comedy before you would get rid of tragedy. But if you only had tragedy, then the joys of life that come with spring and with marriage and all that would be banished. Here he retreats to a mossy cell. It's an isolation. It's the hermit's life. There is no furtherance of earthly life if we only have contemplatives. Thus, Luther breaks his monastic vows to have a life of contemplation and gets married, thanks to Catherine von Bora. Says, okay, Mr. Luther, you're getting everyone else married off. How about you? She hunts him down and okay, there you go. I guess you're right. I can't be a hypocrite. There we go. Then has children. It's the Adamic model expressed everywhere. And then there's disputes in the Reformation. Are the clergy really supposed to be celibate? There are arguments in Scripture that it's a better way of life. But is it commanded that to be a pastor that you must be unmarried? Well, I think Scripture suggests otherwise. Right? The elder, the pastor, whatever the teacher, is to be a husband of but one wife. So you can have the example of Jesus, you can have the example of Paul, but some think that Paul himself was married and that Peter was, and so forth. So it's something that might be superior, but it's not required as a condition for the clergy, and it drives a wedge between the contemplative life and the active life that is unnecessarily divided and too sharply delineated, if that makes any sense. So it becomes so fixed then that the clergy are devoted to contemplation and they have no children, and the nobility of the day are usually pretty stupid in the Middle Ages and devoted to winning victories in war and so forth. So medieval Europe has not yet got the Christian message. They'll have a Christian chaplain, but they themselves will not abide by Christian teaching in their conduct. Anyway, any other comments, thoughts about Il Penseroso, and particularly in its conjunction with Allegro? Yes? No.
Is it much earlier?
Oh, it's much earlier, and the melancholic disposition is always associated with clergy and philosophers, for that matter. Melancholy, you know the melanoma. It's a dark temper. You got too much black bile in you, is their explanation. So it comes from a certain chemical effect, and you tend to be morose and somber and desire to be out of the sunlight and away from the world's affairs and be happy to retreat, and you don't like the lights too much. And again, you're downbeat and you're Eeyore or Puddle Glum, and you see the dark side of everything. And the hold on, let's not be hasty. It's the little hobbits, like Treebeard. You got to be a little bit of a grump and know that behind every silver lining there's a dark cloud. So don't get yourselves ahead of things. I know that you think that everything's going to be good from now on, but let me hold you back a bit. And the result of that is the Treebeards, the contemplatives, never want to go to war. You have to be pulled kicking and screaming. Remember, the Treebeards also know the lore, but they've forgotten some of it. Right? They forgot about the hobbits. They were insignificant. Anyway, Tolkien's playing on this as well in his work, as you can tell from what I just said. And again, if you want to take Tolkien's take on it, he has a contemplative leading the company in Gandalf, but he also has the king, the active. And both of them are men of war. Gandalf goes into battle, and Aragorn is a man who knows the wisdom of the elves and the lore of Middle-earth. He knows it by heart. And the hobbits that are the best hobbits love the elves' stories. So again, the model of the leaders of Middle-earth, the elves, the dwarves, the men, the wizard, all of them are steeped in wisdom, while also being willing to sacrifice themselves in action and in war for the sake of the Shire. So again, I think it's the same note, same message being presented in literature. And Tolkien and Lewis themselves, of course, were not only Oxford academics, but they were involved in World War I and continued to support the cause of the war in World War II, even though they recognized, as you've heard from my class on Lewis, that the problem of the Nazis ideologically was also in England. That's what he's saying. I think he's hinting very strongly that the problem of men without chests, the Nazis are the men without chests. They have no virtue. They have no goodness in them. They're doing really bad things. How about the British school system? What sort of people is it creating? And then he kindly says that they mean better than what they say. Do they really? Or do they really mean what they're writing? I think they mean what they're writing. He's being a gentleman. He's just like when Coleridge criticizes Wordsworth. And he says, well, he says this, but I think he means better than what he says. Maybe he's right. Maybe he does know better. But the words that he writes are very clear and unambiguous. Gentlemanly way of interacting. I hear what you're saying, and they don't say, and you're an idiot, or you're just plain wrong. But let me give a charitable take on what you're suggesting. It allows you to climb down and come to a common ground that will lead you away from your error, more or less. Anyway, that was a rabbit trail again, but yes. Other comments or questions, observations on Il Penseroso? I do think that Milton inclines towards this, but it's not a categoric triumph of the one over the other. Though we note that Milton writes no comedies, but he does put domestic comedy in Paradise Lost with Adam and Eve. If you don't recognize that, you need to, when you read book 4 and read book 9, especially before they part ways, you have to see that it's a comic scene between the two. Milton's having fun. So they're unfallen. There's no argument or strife, but there's disagreements, and there's a little bit, oh, this is funny. This is how the woman sees it. Here's how the man sees it. And they're both sort of mildly ridiculous. Yes?
Very interesting. I mean, as a more pensive person myself, there's something, the way he wrote Allegro is very, like, enticing and attractive. Of like, that feels really nice.
It makes you want to be more cheerful than you would be inclined to as a pensive person. Yes, that's why I say I think there's no way that, I mean, certainly not straw manning. In fact, he's giving the strongest possible case for the opposite, and I think he does it very well. Yes, I read L'Allegro and I think, you know what, I would like to be more L'Allegro. I think you have to. Again, they're companion poems. They need to be read together. And to some degree, the complaints L'Allegro makes about the pensive person are wholly legitimate. You can understand why he would rather be cheerful and why there's goodness in that path. And I think he wants to commend to us something of the goodness of that path. Just like, as again, the contemplative Aristotle is going to commend the active life to his pupil, Alexander the Great, and think it's necessary for the sake of the body politic that we have well-educated men that understand the good and understand the just in office, and not just tyrants and bad men who are selfish in their view of power. They do it simply for making themselves wealthy. Which is in general the path of corrupt politicians. Their children end up many times wealthier than they are after their time in office. It's a consistent pattern of our day, and always the product of a corrupt age. Consistent. And I don't need to name names, because you can see it. It's in plain sight. And if they're really bad and the age is really inattentive to justice, the person in office will get much wealthier while they're in office even, which is particularly bad. Normally you have to leave office before you get wealthy, because it's a little bit too in your face that you're taking money and you're getting kickbacks for your policies while it's still in office. Usually you have to wait till afterwards for the payback. So again, that's an indictment not only of the politician, but the age in which you live that allows for that to even transpire without consequences. Anything else? And if not, we will finish early. Imagine that. Which is not really early, but relatively speaking early. Okay, well then I will leave it off at that. Good.